Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast that you're listening to right now. Thank you so much, called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. It is a daily podcast, 365 days a year, and each day we talk to an author about all of the things related to their career, their book, their life, and more in 30 minutes or less, because who has time? I am now an author myself, although I wasn't when I started this podcast, and you can get my new memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, wherever books are sold starting July 1st, and my children's book, Princess Charming. You can learn more about me at zibbyowens.com, but really you're here to learn more about the authors, and that is what we're going to do. Also, be sure to check out all the other podcasts in the Zcast Podcast Network. You can learn more at zcastnetwork.com and definitely check out those shows as well. Layne is the author of Made in Manhattan. She's a New York Times bestselling author of romantic fiction with millions of books sold worldwide. Lauren has been featured on Inside Edition, The Wall Street Journal, BuzzFeed, The Skimm, Oprah Magazine, Pop Sugar, and Cosmopolitan Magazine. She lives in New York City with her high school sweetheart. Welcome, Lauren. Thanks so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss Made in Manhattan.
Thank you so much for having me.
I feel like I am an expert because I am sitting here on the Upper East Side. So I feel like this story is sort of happening all around me as I was reading it.
I'm actually a Midtown girl myself. So yeah, like I kind of will roam around Upper East Side. I'm like, I think this could be in theory what it's like to live here, but most of it comes from my imagination.
Oh, we could have had coffee. I could have told you the whole thing.
Perfect. Next one I sat there. I do actually, despite I live in Hell's Kitchen, which is a grittier area of Manhattan, but I always go to the uppers for my books. I've set one at Upper West Side, and then I just keep coming back to the Upper East Side. I don't know if it's that Gossip Girl energy. It's the beautiful, beautiful place to set stories.
There's still some fascination with these neighborhoods, even though it's not very exciting. I mean, it's just life going on as normal here, but
it's true. It's true. Yeah, I feel like there is, even for me, a little bit of glamour. And then you see people coming out of their, pretty brownstones, and they're they've got their dog, or their dog is pulling at the leash. And you're oh yeah, they're people. Everybody's just going about their life.
Yeah. The chaos inside is
exactly
pretty similar despite the exterior. All right. Well, why don't you tell listeners a little about what Made in Manhattan is about?
Sure. Yeah. It's the easiest way, I guess, to describe it is sort of Pygmalion in reverse. And I mean reverse in that usually the story of Pygmalion is this guy who kind of makes over a rough around the edges lady, or tries to disguise her as a lady. And for the longest time, I wanted to write a book where you had sort of this very upper class prim woman who was tasked with taking this guy. And he's very much, he's got the beard and the ponytail and the jeans. He does not like his suits. And she has to basically get him boardroom ready, as well as she's trying to sell him on New York as a city as well, because he's from Louisiana. So yeah, it's very, I would say it's a fairy tale sort of, which is, it tends to be sort of my MO with my stories anyway, is just sort of this fairy tale world. There's a lot that's maybe not realistic, but that's also kind of what I love about it. It's just a little escape.
It is. It's a total escape. And I just loved it. I was kind of picturing the main character as the mom from Gossip Girl. Do you remember Blair's mom?
Yes.
I can't remember her name in real life. What's that? Spot on?
That is spot on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of how I was picturing her, blonde and prim and all together. And then, I don't know, maybe because his name was Kane, I was sort of picturing a Dean Cain kind of more rugged.
I love you mentioned Dean Cain. Whatever people, and this, I feel ages me, because I have a lot of readers that are in their young 20s, and they know all these really attractive young 20s stars. And then they're well, who's your celebrity crush? I'm Dean Cain from Lois and Clark back in the 90s. Totally. Who was I just loved him. So yeah, Dean Cain is accurate. He's always on my list.
And I love this idea of trying to whip him into shape when he's so reluctant at first, right? This strapping, sexy guy with his unbuttoned jeans and, this one night stand or whatever is going on. And she's supposed to make him into boardroom material. It's like a total sitcom or movie. It's just perfect. I just love the setup of this whole story.
Yeah, I do. My favorite ones to write are for sure the ones where you can kind of picture them as a movie. I mean, that's always the dream, right? To have it made into a movie. But sometimes even just and I'll even approach it, writing it almost the way that I would a screenplay, just because I think it's so easy to help readers picture every moment when we as writers are picturing it as a movie as well.
What made you decide for there to be loss in her life? Wait, I'm blanking on her name. What is her name? Violet. Sorry.
Violet.
So Violet's parents have died in a helicopter accident years prior, and she was raised by her her great aunt, right? Edith is the
her
great
grandma. And then now her grandma since passed on.
Right.
And now she's like this Edith character. So her grandma's best friend.
Grandma's best friend. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You know, I never really, this sounds terrible. I had an editor once tell me, she's like, you have a lot of orphans in your books. And I'm like, I do write a lot of characters that don't have parents. And part of that, I think, is this is going to sound terrible because I love my own parents. I'm very close to them, but sometimes it's easier to not have parents in the story to have to write about. Because, you know, like a lot of times, like these characters would be calling their mom all the time or getting advice from, you know, career advice from their dad, you know, whatever it may be. And sometimes I like to have them on their own a little bit just because it forces them to grow a little bit. In terms of this one, though, it was kind of a plot device in that I needed a reason why she would take on this challenge. Because it's not like Cain is, like you said, he's very reluctant. He's not easy to get along with. And I'm like, okay, why would she be bothering with this? And I was thinking, you know, if Edith was really sort of all that she had left in the world and Edith asked this of her, she might be a little bit more inclined to sort of give up her life for several months to deal with this very reluctant man.
It's also kind of like, what was the Adam Sandler movie where he has the grandfather he didn't know he had? Mr. Deeds. Did you ever see that?
Yeah.
There's something a little bit about that where someone is just plucked down into this crazy world that they didn't expect. He's not this, I mean, it's not the same person. Well, anyway, just that element of it. Not that you needed a comparison. I also love this, like, these sexual undertones, right? This, like, very steamy, sort of quiet, subdued, like she's embarrassed to admit. And then they have this, not to give anything away, which I will not, but, well, I can't even find it now, but the scene where he's trying on all the clothes at what sounds like J. Crew men's store on something on Madison Avenue. And like everything is fitting him perfectly. And you said something like, and then she started feeling a little warm. And then her voice was a little breathy.
It's so funny you say that because that actually, so my like early books were very steamy, like making this one look tame. Like they were like pure romance novel rated R. And then my last few ones leading up to Made in Manhattan were very much PG. And I feel like this was me. And I knew that like just the story seemed like it was going to be a little bit steamier. But I don't know if it was like me, like having just written these PG ones. And I'm like, how do I do this again? So yeah, it was, you can kind of tell like as I get more and more into it, like as the story goes, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's how you can kind of wind the steamy thread throughout.
No, I got it. I was like, ooh, I'm like, you know, if you could lean into the book, you know, to like read it more closely.
Tell me more.
What's going to happen now? You know, so funny. Wait, so how you've written so many books? Tell me about your career, how you got started. Like, did you always want to be a writer? How did this whole thing happen?
I did, yeah. So I'm like one of those like classic kids that was like the bookworm. Like from the second my parents, I think my mom read me Castle in the Attic when I was like 5, and that was like the first chapter book experience. And then second grade, I discovered Boxcar Children, and I don't know, like it was just something like I just fell in love so hard with books, and I read everything. I was like the kid where my parents were like, can't bring a book to the dinner table, or like we would go on vacation to like Disney World and I'd be like, one more chapter. And like, we got to go see Mickey. So books have always been like, I was a bookworm 100%. And then, yeah, I thought like, well, there can be, the only thing better than reading books must be writing them. So when people would ask what I wanted to be, I would say an author. But of course, you know, it took a little bit longer than that. So, like I went to college, I was going to be an English major. I randomly got a poli-sci degree. And then after college, you know, I had to like pay the bills. So I worked as a receptionist. And then I was actually an e-commerce and web marketing manager for T-Mobile. So like I had this, my entire 20s was sort of this whole other corporate career. And the whole time, especially, you know, if I was like a little bit bored at work or I was just sick of my cubicle, it was always in the back of my head, like, wouldn't it be so great if I could be a writer? But it really, like my parents are like in the medical profession, like I was very much like the black sheep on the kind of creative side. And I was like real people don't do that, right? Like real people have a 9 to 5. And I just had this whole idea of what life was supposed to be. And I think I was about 28 and I just said, you know what? Like I'm so tired of being that woman that keeps talking about writing the book, but I had never really tried. So I got my laptop and every weekend I wrote like 8,000 to 10,000 words, just, you know, and sort of like on lunch breaks and early morning. I learned to be an early morning person because I'm like, I got to get up early before I have to do the work thing. And yeah, I finally finished my first book, Only With You. And I did the whole query agent thing. It was just very like old fashioned, like suffer through the book. It was pretty terrible. Try to learn how to edit it. And then, eventually got the agent and the book deal. And then my husband and I just happened right around that same time. He got a job offer in New York City. So we moved there right as I got the agent, and sort of we were taking off a little bit.
Wait, where had you been before that?
We're both from Seattle. So okay. I wrote my first book in Seattle. Actually, my first two, I have one that's set in the Seattle suburbs because that's what I knew, and then moved to New York City. And then that just became a huge part of my brand.
Wait, how long ago did this all start? When did you write your first book?
I wrote my first book I wrote it probably in 2010, 2011, finished it in 2011. And that was that summer. It was actually I think within days of having typed the end. And it was also coincidentally right as our lease was coming up in Seattle. And we're like, what are we going to do? Are we going to buy a house and do the kids suburb thing? And I had just finished this book and I really wanted to quit my job and be a writer. And then my husband got this job offer in New York City, and we'd never even been to New York. But we kind of were like, you know what? If we don't do it now, we're never going to do it. And our life just took this wild turn. First of all, we crossed the country, kind of completely unplanned, very unorganized. And then, that I just buckled down. I'm like, you know what? Can I have 6 months to try to get this writing thing off the ground, to get the book deal and prove I can make money from it? And eventually it probably took closer to a year before I made any kind of money, but eventually it became my dream career.
Wow. And so what is your timing? You're doing 2 a year? What is your cadence of writing and selling and all of that?
It slowed down quite a bit. It was for a while there when I was first kind of starting out. And this was also back when this was the boom of ebooks, probably 2013 through 2015. And my publisher was like, we just want more ebooks. And the beauty of that is that you can get them out much quicker, or my publisher could, because you don't have to do the printing and the shipping and the shelf space. So I think I was doing 4 to 6 for a while there, which was nuts. But I also think it was probably necessary to sort of get my
4 to 6.
four to 6
a year.
And now, it really didn't seem that crazy at the time. Now that I've slowed down and I'm just trying to get 3, I'm like, oh, it's harder than I remember. But also I think COVID threw the way it did for pretty much everything. It threw a wrench in things a little bit. I went through a few months where I'm like, I can't write romance right now. I can't write these lighthearted love stories. So I took a step back, and I'm just now, I think, kind of getting back into that headspace a little bit. So I would say, to answer your question, probably I'm hoping to do 3 this year and then 4 next year is my plan.
That's a lot. So are you sitting doing it all? Are you writing words all day? Are you how are you getting that many words out in a given week?
I do. So I'm as I mentioned, when I was doing the corporate thing, I learned to be an early riser. So I never considered myself a morning person, but I was like, okay, Lauren, if you're going to have time to wash and dry your hair and commute to work, you're going to have to start getting up at 5 to write the book. So ever since then, even though I don't have to get up at 5 anymore, that's still very much my cadence. And I write first thing, especially if I'm on deadline. It's my husband's sweet. He makes the coffee and brings the coffee, and I already have the laptop open. And I just write in the morning until I hit whatever the word count is. And I have my writing program if I put in the target word count and my due date, it tells me you need to write 3,000 a day or 2,000 a day. And I'm like, here we go. But I also, I write fairly quickly. And I know that sounds really, really braggy, but it's just, I think I always have. And I don't know if it's because I'm a fast typer. It doesn't take as long as people think to do the first draft. For me, the part that really is sort of the more time consuming and the more difficult is after I've turned in that first draft, which takes me 3 weeks maybe. And then when it comes back from my editor, that's the point where I could spend days and days just editing chapter 1. So that's the harder part for me. And that looks a little different because I'm not technically even at my computer the entire time. I may be sort of outlining or brainstorming or jotting down notes, figuring out how to sort of finesse it. But I write in the morning. I would say most days I'm done writing by about 9 a.m.
And then what do you do?
Good question. Then I'm like, what do I do? It's a lot of the business stuff that comes just with author things. There's podcasts, there's the Zoom interviews, book clubs, newsletter. I'm a big fan of websites. So my husband and I launch a bunch of author websites sort of in our spare time. I think websites are important. So that's sort of my geeky side habit. And then lately I've been trying to just spend a little more time living. I was very much for a while there working kind of around the clock, constantly trying to build this Layne brand. And now I'm like trying to teach myself watercolor, and I watch a little bit more TV than I used to allow myself, and just relaxing a little bit. So the mornings are kind of nuts. And then the afternoons are, it's the easier stuff, the Instagram and the newsletter and the, getting back to reader emails, all those, the more fun things.
Wow. Can I hear the story of how you fell in love with your husband? I feel like you guys have the best relationship. I'm here. First of all, he's giving you this microphone. He's like, I feel like he's so doting. I don't know. I got to meet this guy. Tell me about him.
He's like ridiculously, and he cooks too. That's the other thing. Like, not only does he cook, he like makes really good food. I'm like, how did I get so lucky? But we met when we were 15 in high school. We started dating when we were 17, also in high school. And we have been together ever since. So yeah, we're high school sweethearts.
Wow.
Yeah. Whereas it's kind of one of those things. And I'm 4 months older than him, but I'm like a grade ahead in school. So when we first were properly like, okay, let's actually start dating, I was getting ready to graduate from high school, and he was, a junior, and I had already been accepted to college. We were in Seattle. I was going to college in California. And I think in the back of my head, this sounds very unromantic, but I was kind of like, oh, like statistically, like this isn't going to last, but let's, as long as it's, good and we're getting along and we can kind of manage the phone call thing, let's just keep going. And it never, I don't want to say it was easy in that first year, but then
never ended.
Yeah. And I'm like that's sort of his joke. He's like, yeah, people ask how you doing? I'm like, you just keep going. We just kept dating somehow. I feel really lucky because he's a great guy.
Funny. And it's like, what's the secret to a long marriage? It's like just not breaking up.
That's exactly. He's a comedian, and he has a joke where sort of he's like, you just you don't break up. That's simple. People want marital advice. That's how you do it. But yeah, I'm just one of the lucky ones that found one of the really good ones when he was 15. I snatched him off the market.
I'm interested in your wait. First, what is the name of the program you use that calculates your word count? That's interesting.
I use Ulysses. So that is a Mac only program. I would also say I'm pretty sure Scrivener, which is a common. I think Scrivener does that as well, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, Ulysses is great. Every project I open it up, and I know that my first drafts are usually 60,000 words, which is short, but I usually write my first one's pretty short. And I put that in, and I put my due date, and it's fantastic because then I don't have to worry. If I have a lot of time, it may be you need to write 40 words today. I'm like, I can do it. Most often I wait until the end, and I tend to do bigger bursts. And I would also say I'm not one of those people. I like to get on this soapbox when I can. I think there's this common misperception, especially for new authors, that you have to write every day. And you have a lot of very, very successful writers that advocate for that. I think Stephen King and, Nora Roberts, all these huge names, James Patterson, that is their routine, is they write a little bit every day, and that's how they do it. And I subscribe to that as well, but I don't do that. I go many, many weeks where I won't write a single word. And then when inspiration strikes, I may write, 10,000 words or 18,000 words in a day. So if anybody's out there thinking they have to write every day, you don't have to. You can write in bursts if you want. That's sort of my strange rhythm.
So what is your secret to sort of getting to this whole market? You allocate your day to, as you said, the book clubs and the social media and all this stuff. And there is so much of a huge business component in marketing of the product, right? First is just the production of the product, then it's the marketing of the product. How do you do it? What is the secret sauce? What do you think?
It's I feel like this is easy answer. It's harder now than ever. And I feel like every author probably thinks that whatever period they're in is the most difficult. But the romance in particular is so saturated. There is just every single week, books usually come out on Tuesday. And me as a reader, if I go in looking for, a rom-com or something light, there's just so many choices. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if I'm having this, then, readers are having this same issue of where do you start when there's 20 new options every single week? So I think I've been back and forth. I actually took a social media hiatus for a year and a half, which was nuts. I full on shut everything down. I just wasn't on social media, kind of thinking can I just focus on the books? Can I just sort of, that's sort of the idea. If you build it, they will come. And I think I am back on Instagram now. I think, it really is just writing the best book possible. And yes, you do have to do some amount of marketing. I'm not one of those people who thinks you can just completely live in a cave and you never send a newsletter and make it. But yeah, I'm a big fan of prioritizing the stories first. So if that means that I go months without sending my newsletter or doing an Instagram story because I'm in the writing cave, I allow myself to do that because I think it makes the book stronger. And then I'm an advocate for sort of being okay doing things differently. Not, different for different sake, but in a world where so many things look exactly the same, where Instagram feeds look the same. I'm like, everybody's doing the same. I'm not on TikTok. I tried TikTok for like a hot minute, but where the TikTok, like there's the trending audio and all those things. Anytime I can sort of say, okay, if that's what everybody else is doing, how can I stand out even a little tiny bit just to somehow make yourself memorable? I guess that's after that ramble, the way that I would recommend figure out like what you can do to make yourself memorable. How can you stand out from other authors in your genre? Because no matter what genre we're writing in, whether it's children's book or fantasy or sci-fi, thrillers, romance, there's thousands in romance. There's millions of other authors trying to do the same thing. So how can you kind of build your core audience?
So interesting. I love that. Do you think there should be I feel the same way sometimes, like there are just so many books, and I try really hard to promote as many books as I can to like help with curation or whatever, but it can be overwhelming. But on the other side, there are still so many other people who have great books that haven't even been published. Like there's, you know what I mean? So when sometimes I'm like, well, maybe there's just too much supply, right? There's like this overabundance of supply that can't,
Right.
and there's not enough demand there's too much, right? There's too much. And yet there's still so much more production possibility. Like, I don't know. You don't want to like ever have people stop writing all these books, right? I want all the great books to come out, and I want people to keep reading. Are people reading enough? Or maybe people are just reading less, or maybe I shouldn't even worry about it.
I no, like that could have come straight from my own head, because I have the same thought where like there's so many books, and sometimes like I just wish there were like the good old days. Like I sometimes let myself go back to back when I was like in my teen years, and I would go to Barnes and Nobles or Borders like back in the day. And like, there would just be like a couple shelves of romance, and I would know my favorite authors, and there would maybe be 6 new releases a month or whatever it was. And, I think it was probably easier, but I try to remember the flip side is that there were so few authors that were getting a chance back then, because there was the gatekeepers and all these different things. Whereas now that we do have like the beauty of self-publishing, yes, that means there's a lot more competition, but it also means that there's so many more stories that can make it into the hands of readers. And I try to focus on that. I'm like, what? It really does come down to the stories and the readers. And I really believe that there are just these pockets of readers that will love what you're writing. Like we don't all have to be #1 New York Times bestsellers in order to be successful. It's just finding your readers that like what you are putting out there on a consistent basis.
I love that. That's so great. Yes.
It sounds really zen right now. I mean, catch me again sometimes in release week. I'm like, I'm not doing it as well as so-and-so. And I hate when I get in that mindset. So I've like a whole notebook of ways to like kind of reframe whenever I get that sense of discouragement. Yeah.
You should write that article. Can you write that up? I have like this little website called, not website, but I have a Medium publication called Moms Don't Have Time to Write. And we have all these essays by authors a lot of the time. But you should write that. You should totally write that. I want to read that personally. I will write it
add it to my to-do list right now.
Yeah, you can do that after your morning writing and like, Friday or something.
Perfect.
So what's your next book going to be about?
My next book, so I'm returning to my roots a little bit. I'm going back, and this Made in Manhattan was a little bit steamy. I've got a book out in July called You Again. And You Again, I don't know like where it came from, is like the steamiest thing I have ever written. It was just, I'm like, oh, I hope my mom doesn't read this one. But it's very much, it's sort of, I would describe it as like a classic love story. It's just a guy and girl in New York, and they meet at a bar, and they just keep running into each other, like at their workplace, mutual friends, wedding, and they're complete opposites. They don't get along, but spoiler alert, opposites attract. And it was just fun. I think there's a lot of pressure sometimes, or I put pressure on myself to write these really high concept books where it's like the Pygmalion in reverse, or, something that's like a movie pitch worthy. And sometimes I just, like I said, I want to write the love story, and that's what I sat down to do. And it sort of, it flew out of me. So that one is out in mid-July. Don't know when exactly yet, but that's just a fun romance. It reminds me of like almost like a really steamy Hallmark movie type of thing, where it's like a little bit simpler. There's not a ton of side characters and like plot and like danger stuff going on. It's just 2 people living in New York.
Love it. One last question on the marketing side. You said you do a lot of author websites. What do you think it's important for authors to include in their websites? Or what characteristics?
Somebody hold me back. I could go on forever. The short version is that you really only need 6 pages. You need your homepage, your books page, your contact page. You need to have an individual book page template. So each story that you write needs its own book page. And that is probably my biggest, not pet peeve, but that's one thing that I see a lot of people doing is they'll put all their books on one page and just call it books. But you want to have an individual page so that on social media or your newsletter, you can link to each one individually. So that's my biggest bit of advice. And then a newsletter. And I think I named 5. I might be forgetting one. But in terms of sort of strategy, it's focus on what your readers want. And I see a lot of authors will go in there with sort of this grand vision of what they think makes a great website. And I'm sure it's beautiful, but I know for me, the number one page on my own website is just my reading order. And it's literally just a white page with black text of my books in order. And that's what the readers want. So I always encourage them to pay attention to your data, because you can get free Google Analytics. You'll be able to see which pages your readers want and make sure that that's easy to find. It's really kind of as simple as that. And then on top of that, I do love the idea of branding a little bit, sort of what we were just talking about in terms of what makes you different. Why would somebody want to read your book instead of somebody else's? How can you convey that on your website? So for me, it's a lot of New York pictures, because I have this sort of very fancy, upscale fantasy New York brand. But if yours is a small town, make sure that says that on your homepage so that somebody coming in can say, okay, yes, that's what I'm looking for, as opposed to just a list of your books, which is great. But if nobody's ever heard of you before, chances are they're not going to go through and click on each one. They want the highlight reel. Who are you? What can I expect from your stories? I could go on forever.
That's another thing you should, this is really great. I might be actually offering some classes called Z classes. I have a publishing company and a website and podcast network and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, but I want to launch some classes soon. So I feel like you should teach a class in author marketing. It's so important. And everyone is obsessed with this right now.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to talk after this. I want to take your class. I want to listen to everything you say, as an author myself. So
it's so funny. You mentioned you've got all these things going on, which I had kind of known because, I'd done my research and I followed you for a while. But my husband actually, he saw this, I had it on the calendar, and he went to your website and he knew more about you than I did before this podcast. So
I'm telling you, I love this husband of yours. I feel like we all have to go. I have a younger husband too, much younger than a couple of months. He's it's my second husband, but he's 6 years younger. Anyway, we're all in New York. We should all meet up sometime. Have a drink, talk book marketing and all this stuff. And my husband cooks.
And I can find out if Upper East Side, you can tell me if I'm even remotely close. When I walk by, I'm probably really creepy now that I think about it. Sometimes I'll cruise down 84th Street or whatever, just looking up at all the brownstones, trying to my notebook, trying to figure out what's going on in there. So,
oh my gosh, you have to come over. I have to take you on a tour of my friend's house or something. I've lived here my whole life. I know a lot of people. All right, we're gonna do fun stuff.
Perfect.
If you want. Anyway, all right. Thank you so much. This was really fun. I actually learned a lot. That was great. I shouldn't say actually. I learned a lot. That was great. And thank you for Made in Manhattan. Really fun.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I had the best time.
All right. Say hi to your husband.
I will.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.